Viruses are not the only non-living infectious particles in the natural world. There's two other types of infectious particles that we've discovered in recent years. So these are non-living and infectious. And there's two things that we've discovered: Viriods and Prions. Viriods are interesting. They're only made of RNA. So there's nothing else to them. They're just a piece of RNA. It's a short piece of RNA, and it doesn't code for a protein. So that's also really important. So it never makes a protein. Yet when it gets inside of the host cell, so it infects the host cell, and it just makes lots of copies of the RNA. So an infected cell will just make lots of copies of the RNA. And for some reason that we don't fully understand, making lots of copies of that RNA will make the infected plant sickly. And so you can see here two pictures of a tree. The one on the left is infected with a viroid, the one on the right is not. And you can see that this one looks smaller, it's yellowing, and so being infected by the viroid seems to be a problem. And again, at this point in time, people don't really know why. The other type of non-living infectious particle is a prion, and prions are only protein. There's no genetic material. That's part of the infection, I should say. Let me put that a different way. It's only protein, and there's a normal protein that's present and made by the individual. But the prion protein, so the disease-causing protein, is a misfolded version of it. So it's the exact amino acid sequence, but it has the wrong shape. And not only does it have the wrong shape, but it's in an infectious wrong shape. So this is really weird. It's an infectious shape. So if it touches a normal protein, it makes that normal protein also become misfolded. So we can see this diagram of what's happening here. The yellow is the normal protein. The red is the abnormally shaped protein. And what happens is if the abnormally shaped protein touches the normal protein, it makes this one become the wrong shape. So we see that happening here. It's touching the normal shaped protein, and now we get two abnormally shaped proteins. Now both of these touch these ones, and then you get more abnormally shaped proteins. And this continues and continues until the whole area has the wrong shape. And the problem is that this forms a plaque or conglomerate of misshaped proteins. The normal protein is present in nervous tissue, like the brain. So now we're getting plaques of damaged protein and dead tissue in the brain. And so these diseases, the prion diseases, cause neurodegenerative diseases. What happens is the brain starts to malfunction. You have loss of coordination, impaired ability to move, problems like in humans, it manifests almost like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. So just kind of problems with all these nervous tissue functions. The diseases that are prion diseases that you may have heard of, mad cow disease is an example, chronic wasting disease in elk and deer. In sheep, it's called scrapie. And in humans, it's called Creutzfeldt-Jakobsen disease, or CJD for short. And what is really concerning to people about these diseases is that it is only made out of protein. And so a lot of the ways that we normally deal with infectious particles don't address a misfolded protein. So think about heat, for example. We rely on heat to sterilize a lot of materials. And the idea is that heat is going to damage cells and denature proteins. Well, if this is already a protein that's misfolded, heat is not going to hurt it because it's heat stable. It's not going to get denatured. It's already, if you will, denatured. So heat doesn't work as a way to sterilize these materials. And so there's also questions about how it spreads between species. So nobody really knows where CJD came from. So it's mainly present in Europe. And nobody really knows where it came from, whether people caught it from eating beef. And so there's a lot of concern about that too, and nobody's really sure. They did know that it was spreading from animal to animal. So back in the 1990s, when there was a big mad cow disease scare, it was pretty standard practice to feed cow body parts back to cows. And they realized that that was one way that mad cow was getting spread to cows. And so that was one of the changes that happened because of mad cow disease, was to stop that practice. But it is not mandatory in the United States to test cows for mad cow disease. And less than 1% of cows are tested for mad cow disease. And that's a concern to some people, and there's been times when different countries have refused to import American beef for that reason, but it's obviously expensive. The main way that the American system has decided to address mad cow is to have rules about what's called a downer cow. A downer cow is a cow that can't walk into the slaughtering facility, so cows have to be able to walk up this ramp into where they get stunned before they get slaughtered. And a downer cow is a cow that can't walk up that ramp. And because a downer cow could have mad cow, they could also have a number of other things that we don't want in our food supply chain. They are not supposed to slaughter that animal. That animal is supposed to just be kept out of the food supply. But what will periodically happen, and this will create a big news story, is that downer cows will end up, there'll be videotapes of it or something like that. Like a couple years ago, there was a big case where they had filmed them using electric prods to force a downer cow up into the slaughterhouse. And as a result of that, they had to recall thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of beef because that one cow couldn't be separated from the hundreds of other cows that had been slaughtered in that facility that day. And so mad cow is definitely part of why those kinds of recalls happen. Because again, we don't fully understand the disease, we don't understand how it spreads, and our standard ways of sterilizing, like cooking, doesn't work for these diseases. So there's also quite a fascinating story about a very specific kind of prion disease called Kuru. Kuru was present in the New Guinea in specific tribes, and what they eventually realized, and you can go read about this, it's quite fascinating, is that Kuru was being spread by a very specific funeral practice of cannibalism. So their culture at that time was to, when somebody died, was to basically cook them and eat them, and that was part of their spiritual practice. But what they realized was that that was also spreading the prions to the survivors. And eventually that practice changed. So they first discovered it around the 1960s, and I think the very last case of Kuru, the very last person to die from Kuru, died in the 1980s. So it's no longer around.